So as we wait for a few people to get into the stream, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the makeup strategy. Now, this is something that is really, part of the average inflation targeting, the whole credible threat theory, everything that comes into the things that I have been trying to express here on this channel really comes down to this idea of the makeup strategy, to make up for the fact that the Federal Reserve failed to achieve the 2% inflation target over the past 10 years, only to have inflation run rampant to make up for that fact. Now, again, a lot of people don't believe this, they don't see it, they don't hear it, they don't know it. But I've been talking about it for years, and I left a link down in the description to one of the very first videos that I had ever done talking about this particular theory, right? Not even a theory, it's the reality of the situation. It's monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve, but nobody really understands it or knows it, even though they clearly communicated it through their own words, through their documents, through their website, and through public announcements. But nobody paid attention and nobody heard it and nobody listened. And since they didn't reiterate it out there, people just believe that it doesn't exist. So I left a link down in the description to show that 4 years ago, we had taken on the idea that the Federal Reserve was going to make up for the fact that they failed to achieve the 2% inflation target over the previous years. Now that theory is playing out very well, but most people are very confused by it, as they thought for sure that inflation was going to be running rampant into the future and that there was no other way that it was going to go. In fact, I still have people who are arguing with me today, trying to say, well, look at the prices back in 1970 compared to what they are today, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, all that stuff is factual. All that stuff is evidence. All that stuff is reality. The only problem that comes with it is that most people assume that the reason that the prices had gone up was strictly from the money printer. All right? And this is very damaging to trying to understand what it is that the Federal Reserve is doing with their monetary policy, because just because the money printer went off doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find inflation from it. A lot of people will shake their heads when they see that or hear that, but then have no reasons or understanding of why it is that the Federal Reserve failed to achieve the 2% target, even after expanding their balance sheet from $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion. Did not produce the inflation that they were looking for. The market's expectation of inflation was quite extreme at the time. I mean, I know I was one of them. I was the one who was screaming hyperinflation at the time, dumping all my money into silver. But I come to the realization that it's not the money printer that was creating the inflationary scenario. If it was, then we would have seen it from the great financial crisis. Zero interest rate policy and quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and 4, failed to produce that inflationary scenario. So it gave me the ability to step back for just a minute and say, okay, just because the money printer is going off doesn't necessarily mean that's going to cause inflation. When the money printer was going off, everybody pointed at lumber. Look at lumber, dude. You work in the industry. You could see it right there. Hyperinflation is taking place in lumber. And I said, better back off, bro. You better back off. That number is not going to be there here in a few months. You're going to see lumber coming back down to its normal price. Everybody said I was crazy, didn't understand the Federal Reserve, didn't understand how money printing worked, didn't understand any of this stuff. And yet here we are at $480 per thousand on the lumber futures price. It's going to close here next week on the 15th of September. It's going to close below 500 per thousand. And I'm going to make that prediction now that I'm assuming that it's going to go below 500 per thousand. I could be very wrong. It could jump way up before that happens. But I'm assuming from the lumber sales that I'm experiencing out there, and from the lumber mill curtailments that are happening out there, and the fact that the demand coming from the builders is not there, I'm going to assume that the lumber prices are going to probably be where they are today, which is around 480 per thousand, which is dramatically less than the 1,700 per thousand that we were experiencing at the height of the money printer, and everybody assuming that it was hyperinflation scenario that was creating that lumber price to be so extreme. All right? You can take that and you can go run with it if you like, but now you can't explain how come quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed, and you can't explain how come lumber came all the way back down to its normal price. Right? In fact, below its normal price, because now there's a lot more added input cost going into these mills, making 480 per thousand unprofitable. In fact, anything under 550 is probably not very profitable to most mills out there. And I saw the mill curtailments kicking in once they got under 550 per thousand. They were like, man, we don't want to do it at this price. I'm looking out there going, yeah, you probably wouldn't want to be making lumber at this price. They're not doing it. And unless you see the builders coming back in a significant way, you're probably not going to find an increase in demand coming to lumber. And if there's no increase in demand, then there's not going to be an increase in price. And if there's no increase in price, then the producers are going to be like, hey, we're backing out. We're shutting down. We're closing up shop. Right? And that's what we are experiencing today. Right? I mean, sure, money printing going off will be an inflationary scenario. You can't have money printing, or you can't have inflation without the money to create the inflation with. So yes, that makes sense. But of all that and doesn't actually make it out there to chase goods and services, then it's not going to create the hyperinflation or an inflationary scenario in general. It sits in a bank and doesn't do anything. It has to chase goods and services. It has to increase the demand. It has to throw the supply-demand imbalances off, and then you will find that the prices will move. It's not, I mean, you can go into it and throw blame all you want. There's plenty of blame to go around. You can blame the Federal Reserve for what they're doing and all the crap with it. And there's plenty of evidence and reasons, and you can compile it all into a wonderful video and put it out there for everybody to see how the Federal Reserve is absolutely destroying your life. Or, right, you can look at it for what it really is, know that this game plan has been in motion for decades now from the Federal Reserve, that they have a makeup strategy which allows them to believe in the fact that they would want to run inflation higher. Nobody else believes in that. Only the Federal Reserve. Right? Everybody else says inflation is bad. It should be 2%. Maybe it should be 0. Everybody has all these things that they want to say that the Federal Reserve should be doing. However, it's not up to us to decide that. Like, I want to say that the Federal Reserve should not be printing all money and they should back their money with gold or their liabilities with gold. And I have all these wonderful ideas that I would like to share out there too. It doesn't mean anything. It means 0, right? All my good ideas are not for any value outside of a possible theory to have a conversation with. That's it. Okay? The reality of the situation is what the Federal Reserve is doing, what they say they're going to do, and what they have promised from the past. And understanding that they had run out of monetary policy when they hit the lower bound of 0, the only people who really care about that are the other central bankers. Nobody else seems to be concerned that the Federal Reserve lost their monetary policy, their ability to adjust to interest rates when they hit the lower bound of 0. It became ineffective. I mean, this is their own words, not mine. I mean, I didn't even, what the hell's the lower bound? I didn't make that up. That's them, right? They said that this can no longer be an effective tool for stimulating the economy. Interest rate adjustments don't work. And if interest rate adjustments don't work, then why would people be so locked in on what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates? Why? Because they don't see it any other way. And that is done on purpose by the mainstream, in coordination with the mainstream media, the government, the Fed, and all that, to push the narrative out there in a particular way that then has markets guided in the direction in which that they want, because they cannot control the economy in the mechanical form of adjusting interest rates like they once did. I mean, they can do it, but it doesn't impact the economy like it once had. The belief of it, the understanding of it, the actions that people take, and the anticipation of it have so much more impact on the economy than anybody would ever have thought. And when we look here at lumber, lumber is a major component for manufacturing in the United States. Just before you even think about housing or anything else, right? Before residents, apartment complexes, all that stuff. Okay, set all that just aside for just a moment, right? And just to understand that the lumber industry is a major sign of manufacturing that has taken place here in the United States. Think about it. Building is probably the #1 manufactured product here in the United States. Whether it's an apartment complex, a hospital, a school, a home, all right? That is the major component that is the manufacturing base of the United States. Building, right? It's not manufacturing TVs. It's not manufacturing all the other stuff that the rest of the world wants to buy, all those little products, all those wonderful things that we could produce here that would be of high quality. No, that's not it. The rest of the world can't afford that stuff. Right? They buy that stuff from cheaper manufacturers out there who can produce something that is almost as good for half the price. We're not going to compete against that. But what we can produce here in the United States and have value and have pretty much a complete domestic supply, domestic labor, domestic energy, everything is local, is building. And when you have building as slow as it is, you are looking at manufacturing that is in the toilet. And this is the easiest way to understand why it is that we are facing it, is to understand that there is a separation that has taken place between the rich and the poor. If we had a middle class of any kind of like decency comparatively to what we had in the past, then we would have a middle class who would be encouraged to build their own homes, to be able to buy the land, get the permit, hire the contractor, get the materials, and build their own home. It isn't happening. Why? Because the middle class doesn't have the ability to do it anymore, because the middle class has been separated. You're either on one side of the wedge or the other, and even a good job sucks. It doesn't do it anymore. There was a time in this country, and I know people personally. I work at a lumber yard. I know a lot of the old timers. There was a time in this country where an individual, like a dude who's just working a regular old 9-to-5 job, nothing special, getting an average pay, could pick up material on his way home and piece himself together a house. This was a real thing in the past. There is still people who do it. There's a house that's being built by a single guy. He's been spending like 2 years doing it. It's a beautiful house. He's getting it together, but it takes time. It's a nice big house, and he's pretty much working on it himself. That's not very typical. That is almost unheard of to see it. It does take place, but not very likely. Most of the people are not going to be piecing their house together over the course of a couple of years. They're not going to sit there and buy $100 worth of material every week and go and work that material into their project. That's not a concept anymore. That used to be a thing of the past. It was a real thing. And people wondered, how come it is that everybody had ability to have a house? Well, if you had just even a little bit of carpentry skills, you could do it. It wasn't that hard. Like, houses aren't that hard. Once you kind of figure out how they go together, it's not that hard. There's a lot to it, it takes time, it takes some skills, it takes some understanding and energy to it. But once you figure it out, it's not that hard. But yet here, nobody does it. Why? Because the cost of the land, the permitting, and then the actual putting together of the house does not give you the ability to piece it together over time. Can it happen? Sure. But it's not that easy, and most people don't do it that way because it's not done like that. Right? The cost of it is too much, and the time and the effort and energy and everything that goes into it is far more than what the average guy can handle. And so it just doesn't take place. We look out there, we wonder, what is it that we can do in order to acquire a house? What is it that we need to do in order to have an economy that provides enough residents and homes for everybody who would ever want one? Well, you have to have a middle class that is producing stuff for the world in order to have that standard of living. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist here today. How is it that you are going to get the builders to go out there and spend their time, their effort, their energy, their money, everything that they got going into it in order to produce a house that is cheap enough for the average person to buy? And the builder is done with that and says, I'm sorry, there's just no profit in it. The only way that I can profit is to try and build the biggest, baddest house that I can in order to get the margin out of it. And this is really the situation that a lot of builders are in. Is there places in the country where you can build a bunch of cheap homes and, maybe sell them and get some profit out of it? Yeah, sure. You could probably do that. My area, not going to happen. And I'm sure a lot of areas across the country are very much experiencing the same thing. That building a cheap starter home is not a profitable thing, because those aren't the people that you're selling homes to. You're selling them to the people who are on the other side of the wedge, and those people are paying a high price for their homes. And they want a nice home. They don't want a cheap home. Lumber is a perfect example of what it is that's taken place here in this country, as the slowdown is going to be running rampant through the rest of the economy. As you think, like, as people are building, think about how much residual commerce takes place from that. All the truck drivers, all the carpenters, all those people spending that money in other ways. Most of the time when you're building something, it may be in an area that's not necessarily where you reside. You got hotel fees, you got restaurants, you got, traveling expenses, you got all kinds of commerce that has taken place when building industry is ramping up. Think about after somebody buys a house. They don't put all their, like, some people might put all their old stuff into it, but a lot of people, when you buy a new house, they fill it with new furniture, they fill it with new stuff. All that commerce that takes place after you purchase a house, all that stuff is dying off. Right? It's slowing down dramatically. And you don't really have to go a whole lot of places to look other than the demand for lumber. And when you see lumber in slow demand, in slow production, in low prices, this is a sign that economic activity is not doing well. Right? And it's pretty obvious to me. Like right now, here it is, we're getting towards the end of summer. We should have just been pumping out an amazing amount of lumber all summer long. People have been itching, the housing market, there's still inventory shortages, all kinds of stuff that would have a huge demand for lumber considering how cheap it is. It's crickets. I mean, it's starting to pick up a little bit more over the last, month or so, especially over the last couple of weeks. But the reality of the situation is that it's incredibly slow. And there's not a lot of demand out there. And there's not a lot of economic activity happening on account of it. And it's going to be this way going into the future, even if the Federal Reserve was to cut rates. See, this is another thing. Everybody's all anticipation of this rate cut. They're like, oh man, the Fed's going to come in and they're going to cut rates, and people are going to get all excited about that and be happy about it. And I'm like, wait a minute, you do realize that the rate cuts take 6 months to a year before they really start to impact the economy. So getting excited about rate cuts means that somewhere next year, in the middle of the year, maybe sometime around this time next year, that we'll actually be experiencing the full effects of rate cuts that are going to be taking place here in a few weeks, possibly. Yeah. I mean, people just don't get it. They think that once the Federal Reserve cuts rates, that's it, man. It's on. It's great for everybody out there, I'm like, what in the world is this nonsense? Right? It doesn't, unless you plan on going out and taking out a loan right away with a quarter point rate cut, and that's going to somehow give you some kind of purchasing power that you didn't have before. I mean, do people really believe this? I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. It's just to me, I look at that and I'm thinking, this is it's an event, but it's not that dramatic of an event that is going to create all this economic stimulus and activity out there when the Fed goes and cuts rates by a quarter point. That doesn't make any sense. Right? Now, the people's expectations of it does. Right? Now, that has a major impact. People are acting all over the place on account of that. Right? They're starting to make their stock purchases. They're planning on doing refinancing into the future. They got all this other idea of what it is that they're going to be doing with the lowering of interest rates, except the fact that it doesn't really have that much impact on their life. It will in the future if it continues, right? We will see that to be the effect. But for the most part, outside of perception, it doesn't really do that much. Right? I mean, you think about it, it's just I gave up on interest rate adjustments after the Federal Reserve exited the lower bound of zero, right? Once they got off of the lower bound of zero and they started raising rates, and this was during the Trump administration, right? And they got it up to about 2.5%. And that was it. That was as far as they got, 2.5% on the Fed funds rate. Now, understanding that the Federal Reserve, to try and stimulate during a downturn, during economic crisis, during recessionary, whatever you want to call it, right? During that time, typical understanding of the Federal Reserve would be the lowering of interest rates to stimulate the economy. However, what most people fail to understand is that they generally would want to drop that around 5%. Well, if you have a Fed funds rate at 2.5%, and you have a lower bound of zero, you don't have any room. There's no monetary policy there that can stimulate the economy. That's the way it had been for the previous 10 years leading up to it. The Fed had no monetary policy. Literally none. All they had was balance sheet adjustments, forward guidance, right? And the expectation of what it was that was coming. And that was the use of forward guidance to push that. Everybody who's looking out there had no clue that the Federal Reserve was out of the game, right? They thought interest rate adjustments would still be part of it. And so the Federal Reserve played that game. They were like, yeah, once we adjust rates and talk about adjusting rates and then rates, everybody pay attention to the rates, and that's what everybody did. They focused in on it. And they're like, great, now that we got everybody focused in on these rates and believing of a 2% target, now let's screw with that belief. Let's screw with that belief and see what it is that they will do to the economy with just the expectations of rate cuts or rate hikes or just rate adjustments in general. Once you see it, now it's obvious. Here you got all this economic activity that is now starting to take place. People acting in accordance to the interest rate adjustments that have not yet occurred, but yet you see mortgages coming down, right? Why? Like, did the Fed do anything? The Fed's been sitting on their hands. Sounds very much like what happened at the end of last year when the Fed put out the dot plot and had everybody convinced of 7 rate cuts, mortgage rates fell again. Right? When they realized that, oh man, the dot plot isn't exactly a predictor of rate cuts, we may end up having elevated interest rates going into the future beyond what it is that people thought that was going to be cut. And what happened? Mortgage rates returned back up to that elevated level. Now you're seeing them fall again. Why? Because the people believe that there's going to be rate cuts coming into the future. That has so much more impact. I mean, people who believe that everything has gone up in price and choose to look at a particular item that has gone up, right? They're like, well, explain how come this one's up. Explain how this one is up, right? It all comes down to supply and demand, period. If there's not a supply of it, you are going to see increased prices. That's it, right? Supply and demand sets prices. Now, when I look at the most vital commodities known to man, lumber, silver, right? You look at those two, and then you look at oil, right? Oil is probably the number one most vital commodity known to man. We literally eat oil. If we didn't have oil, we would starve. It's at $70 a barrel. Less than 50% of its all-time high. Lumber is like at 25% of its all-time high. Okay? Silver, it's at 50% of, well, just over 50% of its all-time high. Think about this. 3 most vital commodities known to man sit at 50% of their all-time highs, and everybody says, well, explain how come this thing is all out of price. Are you serious? Like, it's supply chain breakdowns that had really ruined the entire economy out there, caused the hyperinflation scenario, and as prices start to find their equilibrium again, people choose not to see it. They're like, no, I'm going to ignore the most vital commodities known to man, and instead I'm going to look at this one other thing that has this real extreme price to it, and then make that my indicator of how we have a hyperinflation scenario. Really? I mean, okay. I mean, I guess that's a way of doing it. I like looking at things that are actually being useful and used by the people, like lumber, oil, and silver. And yes, these are manipulated things, especially silver, right? Hundreds of paper ounces of silver for every physical ounce of silver that exists. Yeah, all that stuff is true, right? Come a day in which that somebody wants to put their cell phone together, their computer, their little component, and they don't have access to silver. I don't care what that spot price is. They will pay any price to build it. Right? So the demand coming from the most vital commodities known to man should be the indicator of what it is that is truly going on out there with the money printer and the commodities and the prices and the economy. Look at those things. Look at the manipulated stuff, and yeah, you're going to have manipulated information and understanding of it, and it's all going to be very confusing, and the easiest answer to say money printer go burr and prices go up, but it's very difficult to understand it in the fashion that the Federal Reserve had failed, that monetary policy had come to an end, that an inflationary scenario was the one thing that they needed in order to save it. If they didn't have an inflationary scenario, they would have been out of the game. They would have been screwed. They absolutely needed it. The problem they needed to solve was an inflation expectation that was persistently too low rather than too high. Now it's too high, totally in line with what the Federal Reserve was wanting and looking for. Yeah. And so, again, like I come out here all the time, I try to explain this. I am showing you time and time and time again how it is that the Federal Reserve said that they were going into a makeup strategy. They cannot explain that to you. They cannot come out on the news and say, okay, guys, listen, we got this really great idea here, okay? We got this great idea for saving our monetary policy. Right? I understand, like, this is, the Federal Reserve saying, okay, we understand that you guys don't really understand what's happening here within the economy, but we are at the lower bound of zero. That means we can't adjust interest rates. That means we need you to believe that there is going to be a hell of a lot of inflation so that we can get off the lower bound of zero. Okay? Because we're stuck here at zero. We don't know what to do. We can't raise the interest rates without damaging the economy unless you have an elevated inflation expectation so that we can fight that. Okay? If you don't do it, we're screwed. Now, if the Fed came out and made a comment like that, do you think that people would actually fall in line? Hell no, right? Hell no, they ain't going to. They had to create an inflationary scenario and then say that they were fighting it. Hey, we're fighting the inflation. Look at us raise our rates. We're fighting the inflation. Hey, guys, we're getting our rates back. Yo, this is so badass, man. They're totally falling for it. Yeah, we're fighting inflation. 2% target. Yeah, this is pretty good stuff. Yeah, 2% target. You watch it come, man. At the end of this year, the Federal Reserve is going to do another change to their monetary policy. They are going to do a review of the the long-term inflation expectations and monetary policy strategies. Okay? Right now, this policy strategy review is going to happen at the end of the year. When it actually takes effect, there will be a change to the way that they are conducting themselves when it comes to the inflationary scenario. Right now, appropriate monetary policy seeks to achieve an inflation rate that is moderately above 2%. This is their words, not mine, their words. At the end of January, that review of that particular policy of long-term inflation expectations and monetary policy strategies will get a review. It may continue to do the average inflation targeting, the flexible average inflation targeting thing that we constantly talk about because there is no target. They may continue to do that, or they may not. They may go back to a 2% target and everybody will be right in line with what it is that they already believe. And the Federal Reserve would be like, hey man, remember that time when we had the inflation expectation or the elevated inflation that was moderately above 2% and nobody realized it because they thought it was a 2% target? That was pretty cool, right? And it will be a thing of the past. They could go back to the 2% target and just say, hey man, we're shooting for a target again. They're not going to, right? They're going for 2% average inflation rate over time, and they're going to do flexible average inflation targeting, which means that they could be running at 3 or 1 on the inflation forever and still achieve their goal. All righty, what time is it? All right, I got like another 5 minutes here and then I got to go. You can only see 400 likes if someone in Congress stops inflation. All right, they will penetrate you deeper next time. Maybe you. Wayne, banksters are gonna bankster. Just remember, they think in 500-year plans, not like average Joe and Jane who think in paycheck to paycheck. You're absolutely right about that, Wayne. Their plans go way, way beyond what anybody else is ever anticipating. I mean, we have a hard time thinking beyond just a few months, let alone years in advance. Most people are just day to day, just like you're saying. So, all right. I know of lenders already offering 75 basis points off as an incentive till October 31st, anticipating the cuts. There's no going back now. Oh, okay. Well, do you think that if Jerome Powell came out on the next one and says, hey man, we're still finding that we're going to cut at the next meeting, not this one, do you think that people would reverse course on all their investments? They would be like, oh, the Fed lied, undo everything they did? Or would they continue on down that path? Right? I mean, think about what the Fed has communicated already. They left it open-ended. They said, hey, the next one, it may become appropriate. The time has come to become appropriate to begin the adjustment of interest rates. All right, well, you ain't done it yet, and it could begin the time to do that. What does beginning to cut interest rates look like? I mean, is it actually cutting rates, or is it the beginning of the communication of actually cutting rates? Because they haven't communicated that yet. There is no communication of a rate cut yet, right? But yet people are convinced themselves of it very much in the same language that was convincing of the end of last year, right? People were like, hey, man, the interest rates are already moving ahead of the Fed. The Fed's lost control. The interest rates are moving without them. It's like, yeah, I know. It's because of the forward guidance, right, that is taking place. Let's see here. Jobs created at a 2021 low. Fed cuts 50 basis points in 3 weeks. Maybe if you give hope to the Trump crowd, we may get 500 likes constantly until the next election. I don't know what it is like. I mean, why would I give some sort of false belief that there is going to be an administration that could come in and save you? You want me to do that? You want me to give out like a bunch of sugar-coated information and like hopium that, there's going to be some elected leader that could come in and like save it? Are you serious, man? I have no belief in that whatsoever. I am not going to do that. I am not going to do that. All storylines are subject to change. There is no political solution at this point. I agree. There is no political solution. If you are not taking control of the information and understanding so that you can position yourself accordingly, you're going to miss it. Because expecting that you can vote for somebody that's going to create a better environment for you to live in is really egotistical. It really is. Like, how egotistical do you have to be to say, it has to be this way, this person, in order for me to continue to conduct myself the way I am and have a happy life? That's egotistical. You can't do that. What you have to do is you have to look at it saying, man, I wish it was this way. That's fine. You can do that. I wish it was this way. If it was, it would be all these other things to it. But it's not. Right? It's not that way. And unfortunately, for not being that way, I can't conduct myself in the way that I want to in accordance to what it is that's actually happening out there. Like, I could try to have an administration come in and elected leaders and everybody else around me to start behaving and acting and doing the things that are most appropriate, in my opinion, in my view. That way I can conduct myself the way that I am and be in a better spot for it. Like, literally, this is what people are saying when they're like, vote for this guy or that guy or whatever. Okay? I don't do that anymore. There was a time I had. I don't do that. What I do is I look out there and I say, hey, man, these are the situations that are out there, whether I like it or not, doesn't matter, right? It isn't up to me to, say, hey, man, you can't do this because I don't like it, right? I mean, you can say it, and I don't know how good it's going to be, right? So you can understand, hey, man, this is not good. I have to internalize this for what it is, figure out what it is that I need to do in accordance to that situation. That's it. That's all you can do. You can wish and hope and dream, right? Hey, man, let's vote for change, right? Okay, we'll see how well that works out for everybody. And if change comes that's in the better, hey, that's cool, right? I don't have any expectations of that, right? I don't have any expectations of that whatsoever. I have the expectations of me to figure out what it is that I see that's going on out there and then to conduct myself appropriately on account of that for what it is that I need in my life. Okay? Everybody says, what is it that we're supposed to do with this information? What are you doing, man? Do you need to buy a house? You need to buy a car? You need to start a business? You need to invest for retirement? What are you doing, man? I mean, everybody's doing something different, so you got to figure it out for yourself. And that's really what it comes down to. I got to go. What time is it? Oh, shit. I got 2 minutes. Okay, guys. That was fun. I just babbled it off. I am glad everybody stuck around. 552 people watching. That's so amazing. With 143 likes. Go hit that like button, everybody. The YouTube algorithm loves it when we see the like button hit. With all these comments, it will pick up this video, spread it around for more people to join in. I encourage everybody who is watching. We got 552 people watching right now. Go take a look at the YouTube video that I linked down in the description of this video. It's talking about the makeup strategy from 4 years ago. It was right after they announced it, that they were going to be doing this. I was very confused at the time when I saw it, but I knew that it was happening, and I kept sticking to that information because that's what they said that they were going to do. And as time went on and everybody was losing it in the inflationary scenario, remember, they talked about this as far as a makeup strategy before we had the inflation. Right? Before we had the inflation, they said we are going to let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time to make up for the fact that we failed to achieve the 2% target. And they said that before there was inflation. Okay? So think about that for just a minute. Did they lose control, or did they take advantage of the situation in order to save themselves? Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.